Some truths can't be articulated in words. They live in gesture, in texture, in silence. They ask us to turn inward to the world within. The art that arises from this space may seem quiet, but beneath the stillness, there's motion, a way of knowing that bypasses language. In this episode, we're asking what it means to turn inward. Can inner life become a mode of inquiry, even connection? And might ambiguity be the very ground where transformation begins? These are some of the questions we'll explore on Edge of Reason. A limited series podcast produced by Atlantic Rethink, the Atlantic's creative marketing studio, in partnership with Hauser Wirth, a home to visionary modern and contemporary artists. Today, we meet two creative voices shaped by the interior, artist Ange Smith and curator Zoé Whitley. In a world hungry for clarity and speed, their work opens space for pausing, for complexity, and for deep looking. Together, they explore what emerges when uncertainty becomes a site for reflection, imagination, and connection. First, we meet Ange Smith, a painter based in London, whose work draws you in slowly, almost imperceptibly, into worlds that feel both intimate and expansive. Her paintings are dense with detail, merging portraiture, landscape, and still life. In pieces like But Tell It Slant and Intermittence, figures and vistas emerge like apparitions, fragile, mysterious, and emotionally charged. Through layered symbolism and psychological nuance, Ange transforms the act of seeing into something disorienting and contemplative. Ange, we're so happy to have you here with us on Edge of Reason.
Oh, thank you for having me.
When you think about the phrase, the world within, what does it mean to you?
One of my favorite cultural connoisseurs sort of reframed Voltaire's quote when he said, "One must cultivate one's own inner garden." And that, of course, was André Léon Talley. And I think he just reframed that to encourage people to dig deep and to put the effort into perhaps thinking in a slightly different way than we are currently culturally conditioned to do so. So it's almost like an invitation to explore and to do the deep dive, and hopefully the arts, when they are functioning as I believe they should, reward that. And I think when that effort is made, what that can do to one's interiority and one's inner life is it can disrupt a kind of settled coherence. I feel very strongly at the moment that we are living through a moment where public discussion and public rhetoric is incredibly simplified and very boorish and almost designed to manipulate and to reduce down. And actually, if we keep our critical skills really sharp, then we are less likely to be manipulated. And so actually, I feel as though it's something that we need to do for ourselves, really, so that we can avoid being manipulated in that way.
Thank you so much for that. In terms of the trajectory of your career, was there a moment in which you decided to take that inward turn to move to a more interior type of direction in your work?
It's interesting. I think various different biographical factors in my life have meant that I have felt on the outside of things. I think my natural language, both the inner voice that speaks in my head, but also the visual languages that I respond to in the arts, are always quite ambiguous. I'm very suspicious of neat and easy conclusions and labels and genres, and even the expectation that concrete conclusion can and should be reached. I feel as though a lot of those old certainties are perhaps a hangover from the colonial past or from patriarchy. I have a great philosophical interest in dialetheism, for example, where something can be true and false. It can be itself and a negation of itself at the same time. I'm more interested in that lens to look through in order to process life events and thoughts that I have in the studio.
Now, I would never want to reduce you to biography, but you did mention life events and thoughts. And you're the daughter of an Irish Catholic mother and a Cockney father. And so you grew up during a time in which that was really a fraught identity to hold. Was that one of the reasons you perhaps began to see the world differently than maybe your peers did?
Yes, certainly. Growing up in the 80s, the two cultures cancelled each other out in certain ways. But it was incredibly useful just to know from the beginning that actually there is not one way of understanding history, for example, or one way of viewing events. And that has been incredibly important, I think, something that I've never felt that I needed to revisit. There are so many different viewpoints on any particular event. And I guess the challenge for me as an artist is how do you create something material like a painting, which bears witness to these different currents and the sort of intangible things that are so complex.
Mm. Thank you so much, Ange. There's a lot to sit with in what you just shared. The idea that there's no single way to understand history and the burden of holding multiple truths at once. And that sense of multiplicity and the power of ambiguity, those feel like perfect entry points to be able to bring in our next guest today, Zoé Whitley. Zoe is a curator and writer based in London, known for organizing exhibitions that are as emotionally resonant as they are visually striking. Whether highlighting the spiritual carvings of self taught artist Elijah Pierce or the Black power urgency of Soul of a Nation, her curatorial voice is unmistakable, intuitive, reflective, and deeply attuned to the inner lives of artists. Rather than guiding viewers towards fixed meaning, she creates space for ambiguity, feeling, for slow looking, amplifying works that linger in the body long after the image fades. Zoe, welcome to Edge of Reason.
Thank you, Jeff. It's so great to be here with you and Ange. This is very exciting.
Yes, I'm excited as well. So, in your work, you've been especially attuned to the inner lives and worlds of artists. I think this is something that a lot of the artists that you work with say about you. I wonder if, as you are hearing Ange talk about her moment of emergence and the ways in which she has come to approach the work that she does, if you similarly kind of remember a moment where you first felt compelled to dive inward, to express your inner world creatively.
I love this question because it actually takes me back to being a very awkward high schooler when I was making artwork. I remember the first time I saw the film Black Orpheus as a teenager, and I decided that for the first painting that was assigned for a 10th grade class, that I was going to stretch my own canvas 6 feet by 5 feet. I don't know what I was thinking. And that I was going to paint the scene after the death scene. So, spoiler alert, it's when Eurydice and Orpheus are falling off the cliff. And this is my first ever painting. So, you've got like two foreshortened figures. And this rocky landscape. And I'm also apparently going to paint Brazil. I don't know. But I think that sense of being so animated and fired up by what one artist or a group of artists were doing on screen that I wanted to be a part of it in some way, or for other people to be able to refer back to the source material. I mean, even in the two examples of my previous work that you've given, both of those were co-curated projects. And I just love working with other people. So I think that for me, so much of an inner world is about how my own thoughts and opinions are shaped and often reshaped by being in conversation with other people, being exposed to their view of the world. And that's always something I've experienced when I'm in front of Ange's works, this kind of jewel-like wonder, and in a way that, to many of Ange's points, are exciting to me precisely because in art history, once you learn a little bit of it, there's a compulsion to categorize. to say, oh, I know what this is. This is like a new version of this period. And I think so much of what Ange is doing confounds those things that might kind of rush us to judgment.
Let's bring in the both of you now and open up the conversation. And I wanted to start by talking about history, about art history, right? About legacy, about labels, about the ways that artists and their work get boxed in. And so maybe this is a question for both of you. How do you navigate the weight of history and the silos that it tries to put you in, even as you're engaging with art history, right? Trying to do something new. Is it about turning inward towards inner worlds as a way to achieve a kind of escape velocity from the gravity of art history? And Ange, maybe we can start with you.
Yes, I think that there are two different kinds of approaches you can make as an artist. Certainly, I have artist friends whose practice I respect a lot, but who differ from me in that history is too painful or too difficult to go into, especially from a Euro or Anglo-Western context. As a contemporary artist, I think it's our job, or certainly my job, to use all of the tools at our disposal to actually take those things head on. And the reason I think that is because I don't see how we are going to get past certain problems unless we deal with the past, you know?
Zoe, how are you hearing this? I'm thinking of your monumental show, Soul of a Nation, and the weight of the histories that you're confronting in that show, especially the long discourse of the dismissal of Black art, even as you were presenting artists who were excluded from museums by that very discourse.
Absolutely. I think that to answer your first question, even while Ange was talking about some artists saying, you know what, I'm going to turn my back on this, I will ignore it. I think the way that I do it is to listen to artists. And the fact that the artists in that exhibition or in any context that I'm working in give no single answer, that artists are completely full of delightful and maddening contradictions is a really important part of it. And there's a real sense that so much of what Ange is talking about in terms of how we're quick to judge, many artists have to fight against that. And so certainly if you are a Black artist, if you're a woman, if you're Black and a woman, then certain things get imposed upon you. And so I think that what is freeing in an artwork is precisely what is conveyed through that feeling, through what an artist is able to make. There's that sense of fabrication. And I don't mean that in the sense of falsehood, but like in a literal, actual making of a thing. Ange is there fabricating connection. You feel it in the work, you feel it, and then it stays with you. And that wouldn't have existed if an artist hadn't made the thing that you're witnessing. And so I suppose a lot of that urgency comes from the fact that so many times artists are experiencing these extrinsic pressures that we may all be under. But what they do with that is like, that's amazing to me.
Ange, do you see yourself as creating, when you think about the totality of your work, kind of a counter archive, one that's centering on personal symbolism, emotion, imagination over the official record of what women artists are supposed to be about?
I mean, I just think by even showing up, somebody like me creates a small problem for the received opinion of how work is meant to be made. For example, I felt really drawn to use in places very gratuitous language, very detailed language with a one-head squirrel paintbrush. Lots of detail, lots of specificity. And at the time, that was seen as very unfashionable in contemporary painting. A lot of narrative needs a scrupulosity in order to convey its meaning. And actually, a lot of abstraction or minimalism that was so radical when it first appeared, but has since become quite a cliche and quite kitsch in a sense. A lot of that language, that pared down aesthetic, it very conveniently removes a lot of those narratives, which allows for a more mainstream takeover.
I loved that when you started, your first reference point was Andre Leon Talley. And a lot of the conversations that you and I have offline are about who gets to decide what's important, who gets to decide what's serious. But I think that there is that sense that even something we all want to be a part of, even with the immensity of art history and how we hope that we can contribute to it, it is possible to like fray those edges and unravel some of those things and reweave it and hopefully make something that is kind of better and stronger and more reflective of all of us.
I'm struck by how some kinds of details are valued over others, right? How critics might praise one kind of expression while dismissing another. And your paintings push back on that. You insist on your own kind of details to your own inner world. And so I wanted to ask, how do you decide what emerges from that world and what makes it into the painting? Like how much of it is you, sort of poking your finger in the eye of anybody who wants to deny that, right? And how much of it is, this is what needs to be seen. People really need this.
I mean, I always joke that I set out to make a really fashionable, wishy-washy, thoughtless modernist piece of art, and then it just always turns into this kind of.
But you just can't do it.
Tortured. Yeah, I'm joking because every single language that I employ visually is agonized over as to whether that's the right apt language for the work. One of my main stipulations to myself currently in the studio is that I am very much dedicated to an oblique approach to narrative, to image. One of my paintings recently was called But Tell It Slant, which is a reference, of course, to Emily Dickinson, Tell All the Truth, but Tell It Slant, in the sense that in order to draw attention to something, you can approach it in a very circuitry way, and then it's easier for people to listen to what you're saying. And that particular painting of mine that I cite references Botticelli's Venus, but she is being clothed because her nakedness, the truth of her naked body, is too much for the audience, the viewer, to take in. We have to experience truth and beauty clothed, which has all sorts of complications around it, of course. But I love that image of the oblique approach because I think it has profound implications. But also, for the reasons that we've just been discussing, I think if you're not part of the mainstream, whoever that is, if you feel as though you experience reality and society in a way that makes it very clear at times that things have not been organized for your convenience, let's just put it that way. If you experience life like that, any kind of marginalization will bring that home to you on a daily basis with 1,000 different microaggressions. I always feel as though somehow you experience life sideways, or you're living life sideways. And I think that my approach to image making, which has so often been misunderstood as surrealist because that's the nearest easy label, is actually a reflection of this kind of sideways reaction, sideways living to mainstream culture. You always have to wade through a few extra steps just to get anything done.
Ange, that makes me think of the Lucille Clifton poem about Lucy One Eye. That's you as a painter, that Lucy One Eye can only see the world sideways. So she says what she wants to say. She's not going to do what she doesn't want to do. And there's like a lovely line at the end about how she'll keep on trying with like a crooked look and wrinkled ways. I think that there's something about that as a strategy, like what it means to approach something from your position, even if it doesn't seem to be the straight ahead one of everyone else. That's pretty great.
I actually feel a little bit tearful. Thank you for that. That's absolutely wonderful.
That's beautiful. We've been talking a little bit about this sort of so-called mainstream gaze. I guess maybe we'll just put it that way. I'm wondering though too, Ange, as you're doing this work, what are you asking of the viewer? You make these extraordinarily detailed paintings. They're very large scale. There's a lot of different types of things happening within them in different registers. And I'm wondering, your art really hits home with lots of people. What is it that you're asking them to do at the end of the day when you put your brush down, your squirrel brush down?
That's such a good question. I think what I am asking is for time to be spent. And I don't mean lots and lots of time, but maybe 3 seconds of your time. Because I feel as though we're completely bombarded with images and we're saturated by data points that keep refreshing. And what that has certainly done for me is to give me an incredibly short attention span. And I feel as though there's almost like a cultural conditioning just to consume data constantly, but in a very shallow way. And unfortunately, then you can't really feel the depths. And there's a real danger, I feel, living in this particular moment, that we will lose our critical skills if we just keep sort of splashing about in the shallows and never go into anything in any depth. Because I'm trying to ask people to slow down, because you will not be able to experience the painting unless you do that. There's certain aspects of the minutiae that will only appear optically within like a few seconds, a minute or two. I try and make the visual language as seductive as possible to draw people in. And then I hope that things that I'm thinking about in the studio might hopefully unfurl for the viewer. But what I really want to do is offer people that don't feel seen in whatever capacity that might be, a moment of recognition, because I feel as though that is incredibly galvanizing for us as humans. I know certainly when I've experienced works of art that speak to me continually, it just provides incredible solace. And we are living in such toxic times that are so distressing for everybody. One thing the arts can do is to provide these moments of recognition for people that might perhaps not feel heard or seen so much in their everyday realities.
Zoe, I imagine some of what Angie's saying here is hitting close to home.
I think that what I always appreciate is what an artist is willing to share and where they're willing to allow us in. So in that way, I think of Angie's approach, and I think of an approach by someone like Kathy Wilkes, who is never going to tell an audience what to think, to know that there's enough space for you too. And that what it means for the artist, even if you feel something different or it's resonating with you, but maybe not at that same frequency or for the same reason, the fact that that's okay, I think is really important. But I think some of it also has to do with permission, like who gets to look at something and to say, I feel something about this. So I really appreciated hearing that generosity, that all of that act that is so deeply personal also means that, wait, you're here too. I want you here. I want you to be not just beholding it, not just possessing it, but also having a relationship with it. And I think all of the most memorable works of art that I can think of, or even the ones that I can't conjure in my mind, but that I have like a real deep sense memory about, come from that.
That sort of mutual meaning making, I suppose.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, because I see the paintings as conceptual art. So you need the viewer and their lived life experiences, which I can't possibly access, to complete the work of art. So the work of art does not exist on the wall. That is not the work. The work is what happens in the mind of the viewer and the mental, psychological furniture of somebody that's looking at the painting. And, you know, I think as an artist, you have to take responsibility as much as you can for how the work will be received. But then after that, you hand the work over to the viewer, and it's an invitation to them to take it in whichever direction they want. And at that point, you have to let it stand on its own 2 feet, you know?
Can we also talk too about the social power? I'm just wondering, like, what is the importance of ambiguity in the moment, in the right now of things? Ange?
I think nuance and ambiguity and language that follows that kind of sensibility, it opens out discussion and it refuses to settle on certainty. So within my painting practice, I deliberately employ these things as tools because I don't want meaning to settle in any one particular direction. So, for example, I'm making a painting at the moment, which is a kind of frozen ice scape. But I'm thinking of it in terms of the ecological disaster that we're experiencing right now and the terror that evokes. But I'm also equally thinking that the work could be nothing to do with that at all, but about a state of anxiety, about pathological fear, anxiety, a sort of mental disintegration. So it could also be read through that lens. But also maybe it could be something else that I'm thinking about, like a still life that has certain signification in the objects that are employed in the painting. So it could be taken in many different directions and they are valid. It's not whimsy. It's not, well, any interpretation is possible. I'm not doing that. I'm being very specific, but there is freedom and abstraction within that specificity, if you see what I mean.
Zoe, what are you hearing in this?
The world is hard and it's scary and things are difficult and uncomfortable. And so I think it almost seems bonkers to invite people to be more uncomfortable. We want to be comforted in these difficult times. And sometimes what we already know is the most comfortable thing. But I feel like when we're talking about art and what artists have to say, I feel like that's often where you get the most against the grain things. And it takes the rest of mainstream culture a long time, or maybe never, to catch up. And so I think the fact that anyone who's doing something that doesn't look like exactly what we've seen before, or is trying to approach things obliquely, that makes me want to look at it again. I think that to me is why it feels so important now, because that reentrenchment that Ange has mentioned in so many different contexts in our lives, where we might then just hunker down with those who think like us, who look like us, who worship the same places we do. Like in every aspect of life, I feel like maybe, hopefully, art can be that slightly risky, slightly uncomfortable zone where something else might happen. And then the needle just moves that little bit more.
And maybe this is the last question. Do you think that the worlds within are the key to unlocking the worlds without?
Oh, that's such a good question. It's actually really important, I think, that we cultivate our interior lives. I've got 4 sisters, and they're all doctors or making a contribution to society in some very concrete way. And I do feel that I need to, as an artist, also pull my weight socially and make a contribution. I think one of the things I can do that is to highlight the human potentiality. Like, we all contain so much ingenuity and healing and growth if we want to access it. So the discomfort that Zoe mentions, I think, is part of that. But I think there is a huge reward with putting ourselves in that difficult place, because that's the place that then we can grow from. We can challenge our own assumptions, which in my case has always been a great thing to do. There is no singular viewpoint that needs to be a dominant viewpoint, and that if we listen to other people, we might collectively facilitate growth, healing, and onwards motion. We do need to challenge ourselves and keep our conceptual boots laced.
I'm Jeff Chang, and you've been listening to Edge of Reason. If you enjoyed what you just heard, like and review us on Apple Podcasts and help spread the word about our series to other listeners like you.